I'm joking. Anyway, yeah, so you were saying?
Oh, I was just saying, you guys are in the future, so you'll have to let me know what I should expect here in the next few hours.
So actually, it's exactly what we're going to talk tonight. Danny's joining us. I would love if you guys try to, on social media, bring other community pros. And I think this is the time actually to announce something, but we'll announce it a bit later. Yeah, I gave you a few tips about it. I'm not sure you were sure about it. You didn't get what I said, but actually we got somebody that's going to join maybe, and we're going to talk about it in a few minutes. But the main point of this session is it's a shitty business world for community consultants, to be very honest. People say, yeah, I want community, and okay, you need to invest this amount of money for this amount of time. Like, no, I don't want to. I want community, but I want it like, can I buy it in a candy shop? Like, can I buy like 20 grams of community or like 20? And they don't get, it's not like, you know what I mean? You don't buy it. It's a long-term investment. It's not like how I feel. And I actually did a great session. They were inviting me to consult in an organization. And suddenly I had this epiphany of drawing it on a graph that, campaign is like this and community is like this. And then it's a like asymptote that goes straight. So once you get to your peak, again, the size is the same. But then if we do it at a 3-dimension, the amount of value goes and becomes even larger. And, and people want to get to that far end, but they want to get tomorrow and they want to know exactly what happens, which is the exact contrary to building a community, because with a community, you don't tell them where to go. And the thing is, even startups or corporates that are realistic are the same, because they can have an amazing plan and have a 5-year plan and everything's written in a spreadsheet, but still, life is going to change and they have to all the time change. We just know from the beginning, we're realistic that the community will lead us. Like, we're just facilitating and they'll help us understand what we need to do. So the question is, how do we, in the world that, I have a friend a decade ago, he used to work in Microsoft in marketing, and he used to say that marketing is last to hire and first to fire. I think it's not the case anymore. Marketing today, everybody knows how important is marketing. Sometimes marketing today is more important than product, or not product, but like more important than many other departments, or they understand that in today's noisy world, you have to have marketing to be heard. And even if you have the best product in the world, it's like the tree. If a tree falls in the forest and nobody's around, doesn't make a sound. So if you have the best product in the world, but you don't have good branding and people don't know about it and don't appreciate it, do you have a good product? Will you succeed? The answer is very clearly no. It's not a bonus, it's a must. And I think this is one of the biggest challenges of explaining why is community a must? How do you consume community? How do you consume us as service providers? Sometimes as product providers, and you're the best guy to answer that because you worked for over 9 years in lithium, and you were the biggest supplier of community platforms. And I would love to be in that framework. How do people buy community? How do people invest in community? How do they put budgets for it? And how do you appreciate it during the time? So since we're gentlemen, we're going to start first with Talia. And Talia, I would love to hear your experience about consulting for different organizations. Who did you consult with for in communities, and what were the good experiences and maybe more challenging experiences?
So I can say that the challenges in outsourcing community work are pretty consistent across the board, where the only real differences were how well we were able to set expectations in advance on both ends. On our end, we need to know what we're offering and what logically we can do for them. And we need to know what their plans are and what their goals are, because just saying I want to have a community isn't enough. And that's not what's going to create a good community, because it doesn't matter what a great job I could possibly do. If it doesn't align with the goals of the company, we're not going to be able to reach those goals. So before we even start with community management or social media or any other type of marketing effort, first we need to make sure we know what the client's goals are. And it all comes down to setting expectations. and both on the end of the client on saying what I want is A, B, C, D, E, and on our end to let them know that out of A, B, C, D, E, my job actually would only include A, D, and E, and B and C is a different type of role or something that maybe couldn't be achieved at this point. And I really, and we were just talking about this backstage, that like 90% of the problems that I've had, and we were actually talking about it in a different matter, like we were discussing working with influencers, but it's the same thing. Like 90% of the problems that we faced wouldn't happen, don't even happen, as long as we do set expectations in advance. And I feel like my job as a consultant is to make sure that we're all on the same page before we even start working together. And I actually had someone come to me this week because they're starting a new company and they wanted to build a community. And after talking to them for about half an hour, I realized that would, like, the worst thing they could possibly do right now is try to open a Facebook group, because that's what they wanted to do. But the truth is that they didn't want to keep a community on Facebook. And so building like a community on one platform and then transferring the entire community to another platform is virtually impossible. And I'm really happy that I was able to get deep enough into what they want to do and their plans to see that what they wanted from me wasn't going to work well. And had I not gone far enough and deep into their plans and what they want to do and what their goals are for the next year or two, I wouldn't have known that their plan is not to even stay on Facebook. I have a big community on Facebook myself, so I'm definitely not against Facebook as a platform, but sometimes they do need to be on an external one. On the other hand, we also need to make sure that our knowledge is wide enough that we're able to compensate for the fact that we don't work at the company. We need to make sure that we're on point and we're able to navigate this entire company that we're not even there. And a big part of it is making sure that our relationship with the client is something that is smooth, because if the onboarding process isn't working well, then the chance of the actual work going well is pretty small. And we need to make sure that we're getting the information that we need, that we have access to the information that we need. Because like any other marketing activity, if you only do a bit of it and you don't get to do all of it, then sometimes the success can be a problem when you don't see the whole picture. And the problems go both ways. I mean, and again, it's all figuring out what it is that everyone needs to do. You had asked a lot of questions, so I don't remember all of them, so I apologize.
So before we move to Brian, I just want to recap on one thing that you said that's really important, because they came to you and they wanted help with you with the community, and suddenly you were sucked in because you're so passionate about what you do to explain, okay, so you don't need the Facebook community, you need something else, and do a lot of other stuff. Were you paid for that service? Exactly.
I didn't ask for payment because I originally didn't go into this as something that was supposed to be to really advise them. I didn't come as a consultant. Originally, what they wanted me to do is open this group. They came to me and they said, we're trying to reach an MVP, and we want to open the group. We want it to be here specifically in Israel, but it does need to be in English, or it needs to be a certain, I don't remember anymore what the details were. And we want to open it. Oh, they didn't want it in Israel on purpose, but they want a specific community to show an MVP, to show that there's a need for what they do and for their product. And I had to ask them questions to make sure that I'm the right person, and also to see what they want to do. And then, because they didn't come to me originally for consultancy, had they done that, yes, I would have actually asked for money. But what ended up happening wasn't that I told them they need to go to a different platform, but that this probably isn't the right solution for them. And really, if I would have taken this job without doing that, I would have done a huge disservice to both of us, because they wouldn't have gotten what they needed. They would have had problems, and I would have been the one who wasn't professional. So I'd rather not take money than take money and not do something that would backfire.
I totally agree, but you also saved them a lot of money on the way. So Brian, what's your take on that? How do you start a project? So what's your take on it? How do you start a project? Like, are we madman? Meaning, like, are we the people from Madison Avenue that we need to pitch, and we need to do presentations, and we need to understand the client, and and then if we get them, we get them, and if not, it's not. It's part of the cost of doing business. Or should we have a different way of working? How do you work? How did you try different things?
Yeah, well, so I'll start by saying what's interesting from my background is you mentioned it at the top. So I worked at Lithium, which is now Khoros, for 10 years. And during that time, I was doing outsource moderation, outsource community management, and then as a consultant. And then I went out into the, as you said, the bad guys, the corporate world, and I was running community in these companies, right? So I sort of got the alternate side of the view there. And now I'm back to, running my own consultancy. And so I've kind of seen this from all the different angles now, right? Which is good. And I think that, there's clear differences. I think when you're coming at it from a consultancy perspective, it's better than it used to be because now we have all of our experience to lean on and we can point people to things we've done and say, hey, look, here's exactly what we did. Here's the steps we took to get there. And here's what we can do for you. And so I think having just more of that history and proof is a really good thing, and helps us kind of tell the story. To your point, when I engage clients today, it's a little bit of both, right? So on one hand, it's, hey, here's what I've done in the past, kind of as a portfolio proof. But then there's also typically conversations around, hey, how can I work with you? What's and as you know, the one thing that's funny is every company thinks they're like super different and no one's ever seen anything like this before. And, I don't know if you're going to understand what we're talking about. And I'm like, yeah, you're the exact same as everybody else, which is good news, right? That like 80 or 90% of the problems we're trying to solve are things that are common among most organizations. And then there's the 10 to 20% that certainly is custom and needs to be tailored for their specific, problems or use cases or strategy. So it is kind of interesting in how you talk to these folks. But I think the last thing I'll say about this is I think failure has helped us a little bit. And what I mean by that is it used to be when you went to an organization and you started talking about community and why it was important and how you're going to improve it and build something. There was no frame of reference, right? Like they didn't really know because they hadn't tried it before. Nobody in the company had tried it. So it was all brand new. And that meant that the bar to success was generally higher. Now, a lot of communities or companies or people at companies that have been at other companies, they've tried some things, they've failed at some things. And I think they have a little bit more of an affinity now for what those difficult areas are. It's not that it's perfect or that it's, easy or anything like that, but I find that I'm running into a lot more people that have at least some context, right, for what this is and why they want to do it. And they still have the scars to show, for their past troubles and failures. And I think that kind of helps set some of the expectation a little bit better.
Okay. I'll be Israeli and call you out that it's very general, but so I'm Mike in corporate and I come to Brian and I say, listen, I want to build a community. How do we go from there?
Well, how I go from there is I'm going to start talking about what your business problem is, right? So what are the high level objectives of the company? And how do those map to what you're trying to do?
Office. Let's schedule an hour and a half and come to my office. Let's talk about my business problems. Do you come for free or do you charge in advance?
Yeah, so my take on that is probably not an hour and a half, first of all. But second of all, yeah, I mean, I think for me, there is some level of discovery that takes place prior to signing a deal. But you're right that there are some situations where if what they're trying to accomplish has that level of complexity or, we're not going to be able to do it in a reasonable period of time, then I think you have a conversation and say, hey, how can we work together? What does this look like from a discovery perspective? And what does compensation mean to that? I think, all three of us here probably have different approaches to that. And to me, it's not necessarily a one size fits all. It's probably like, depending on the situation, right? Which way I decide to go.
Right.
So that's what I want to try. I want to give, I really believe in open sourcing. To some extent, I think open sourcing is good and we need to have our boundaries and it's part of what we want to talk about and, find it. But I do think that the more a few colleagues of mine in Israel actually started telling how much do we charge and it really helps because people are scared because, oh, they'll know how much I charge. They'll charge maybe, a fraction less, but it doesn't really work. And on the other side, it's not like being a cartel that we fix prices. It's
Right.
just to give a ballpark, or I think different methodologies of how to tackle issues like that, which we don't even think, because we want to be. I had John O'Bacon before you, to an hour and a half before, and he says that he loves doing consulting, but he hates the bureaucracy, the contract, the sales, and he outsourced all of that. But before you outsource, you need to decide, because even if you outsource whatever you want, like a design, you have to explain to that outsourcing person, okay, the process is, this is the algorithm, you need to do this, this, and that. So I want to give different algorithms or ideas, even though if we use or activate different of them. So let's talk just case studies and have an amazing, valuable talk that's recorded and we can talk about. So first of all, listen, if it's not an hour and a half, how long do you go to a client? You don't go for half an hour, because you already go to a client, you don't come for half an hour. 45 minutes, an hour, it's almost like an hour and a half. Great. So you come for an hour, 45 minutes for free, and you understand the issue. And what happens after that? And of course, we can do other case studies, but and you don't have to answer. We can do it with Talia, and I can do it the simulation. But I think talking honestly about the issues and giving examples of simulations is what will help young community professionals the most. So
Sure.
If we could continue.
Well, yeah. So let's say we do the hour, right? Hopefully, by the end of the hour, I have a pretty good read on what the business challenges are, how community maps to it, and what type of service level or engagement they're looking for. Usually within that hour, I'll explain, hey, here's the 2 or 3 different types of programs that I usually offer, or packages, and kind of get a sense from them. Does that sound like that's, going to fit with what your needs are going to be? And really the takeaway from all of that conversation for me is, and the next step is, okay, I will go back and write up a proposal of what I think an engagement looks like, a statement of work, if you will, right? And I'll send that back to you in a couple of days. And then from there, we can look at it together if we need to get on another call and go through it, so that they fully understand, here are the very fine, here's the actions, here's the deliverables, here's what you're going to get, here's what it's going to cost, here's the number of hours, whatever those particulars are. And from there, it's more of a collaborative, sort of relationship back and forth of fine tuning that. And typically the real piece of fine tuning there has less to do with me and more to do what they think they can sell internally to their teams and finance and whoever's going to be the approver on it, right? So we do a lot of work together to make sure that it's in a place that when someone sees it for the first time, they go, oh, of course, this is exactly what we need. And we can sort of make it a little bit easier. It's never easy, but a little bit easier to get through, that particular like approval flows and all those kinds of things, right?
Talia, I feel you have something to say.
Me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I do. I have a question. How do you work with your clients to define how seriously your work is going to be taken? I'm not quite sure how to define this the right way, but having worked in-house in community management, before I went to Payoneer, I actually decided I'm not working in community management anymore. After having worked in the field for, I think it was like 7 or 8 years at the time, because I was sick of organizations saying that all they need is community management, but then I wasn't getting a budget to develop the different things that I thought needed to be done to be able to really grow. And I don't mean grow by a few, but I mean really scale in a good way. And I actually switched careers, and I was accepted to work as a product manager at a startup. That was actually a really good startup. And when Payoneer came over, one of the first things I said to him, because I actually had interviewed there 2 years before and ended up choosing another company, I said, listen, I can't work as a community manager, director of community at that point. I can't work again at another company and not have the resources that I need to be able to do a good job. And what he said to me was, I will literally write in your contract that you will get every dollar that you need to do what you think needs to be done. And that's when I signed with them, because I felt like my hands were being tied. And so when I'm Doing consulting work, it's a little less of an issue. But if I'm doing some of the management itself, then, and this is why I've been avoiding the management part, that's exactly the reason why. So I'm really interested in knowing, do you do any of the management itself, or do you only do the consulting and then they have someone that does it in-house, or you train someone to do that?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it's funny because before we went live here, you and I were talking about setting expectations, right?
Right.
So here we are, full circle. So, here's a couple things from my perspective. One is, when I have that initial conversation with people, I try to make it very clear to them who I am and who I'm not, right? And so the who I am part is, I am a strategic consultant, meaning I will come in and we will do discovery. I will build you a strategy, and then I will provide guidance and learning and the weight of my experience, right, as we go through implementation. But I make it clear that, on your side of the table as the company, I'm expecting you to bring whatever it is. So in most cases, it's who on your team is going to actually be executing this, right? Or are you going to hire someone, or I can help you hire someone? And usually that conversation sort of gets them thinking about, oh, okay, I get it. Like, we need to hire somebody, a community manager or a director of community or whatever that title is.
And then what happens? Say, okay, so we'll hire them, and when we hire them, we'll hire you. And that's one of the scenarios I get. Okay, so we need a budget for it. Okay, so we need that. So, and it becomes to be like, what's the chicken and the egg?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting because I haven't run into that too much. I've run in more of the, like, it's baked into part of the statement of work of, I will help you write a job description and hire someone, right? And that's part of the value that I'm going to add to this. And so that sets the expectation of, oh, okay, we get what Brian's role is going to be here. The other side of the story is, in the statement of work, I very specifically call out, here's what I do, here's what I don't do. And I put the expectation level for what their internal resources, first of all, who are they? What are their roles going to be? And what percentage of the project time are they going to need to contribute? So I'm all very upfront about that, right? And also the cost, I think, generally helps people understand, because like the initial question was, how do you know if someone's serious, right? And part of that is when I come and say, okay, here's the scope of work and here's what it's going to cost and here's the expectations on your side for resourcing, that generally sets a good expectation of, oh, okay, here's what it's going to take to be successful. And there's, some negotiation in there, but generally speaking, that's how I've approached it.
So great. So by the way, if I can ask, how many companies did you already do the process that you did? Okay, we want a job description, and that was part of the program, because as Talia asked, I think none of us today do the community management itself, correct? Like,
I'm approached for it, but I've been avoiding it. But it's also because of the time difference. I mean, other than the fact that it isn't scalable, because I live in Israel, but I write in English and I do my work in English, then usually they want me to work on American hours. And I'm at a point where I don't work after 6 unless it's, a conference or something special, but I'm definitely not going to be working every single day in the evening.
Or talks with Mike and Danny, remember, or talks with
okay, yes, like conversations at 1 a.m. that end with Mike and Danny, but that's, our personal choice, and it's something I'm not being paid for, so it's easier to do.
Okay. But okay, so I was asking, so how many jobs more that did you get to do it, and how often does it happen? That's mostly how it looks. Okay, just write the job description and help create a community program.
Yeah. So I've done that 4 or 5 times now. The job descriptions vary a little bit depending on the leveling. So that's usually the real question, right? Is it's like, are you trying to hire someone who's very senior and strategic? Are you trying to hire someone who's maybe a little more junior, but like really good tactically and operationally? And so based on their goals, I try to like figure out, what role do you need, and who's the type of person that you're looking for. I'll help them write the job description. I'll promote it to my network. We'll go out, we'll find someone. I'll participate somewhat lightly, but I'll participate in the interview process, right? Just to make sure that by this time, usually the customer really trusts me, right? And so they want to hear what I think about these candidates. Most of the time I know who the candidates are anyway. And then we go like that. And then From there, my life gets a lot easier, right? Because then there's a pretty clear delineation between, okay, Brian's helping us set the high level strategy and the goals and the best practices and all of these. And then this person is helping us actually execute that from day to day. And I find that to be a pretty good model because then I'm offloading everything in my brain that I possibly can into this person. And so by the time that, if my contract expires or we don't renew it or whatever, then they have everything that they need to be successful without me, right? Which is the actual goal here. It'd be nice, for me to stick around forever. Yeah, right. Right. So it's a lot of this, and I think that's why people feel comfortable with that approach, right? Because it's not me saying like, well, you'll have all the expertise in the world while you have me, but then when you don't have me, you won't have it anymore. It's more of I'm going to give you the expertise, the frameworks, and help you train someone essentially that will know what I know, right, when I go away, and then you're set, right, and you can continue on.
I think the best way to describe it is community parenting, because that's what you do as a parent. You give birth, a lot of pain, a lot of expenses during the way, and then all you do is give them all the skills and abilities they need to get the fuck out of the home.
So. I've done that too. I have to say I've also been involved in the job search process, helping clients find the right community managers. It's much more underdeveloped here in Israel than it is in the States. And more than that, if it's not a community manager for a Hebrew community, then the pool of candidates is automatically so much smaller, because if you want someone to be here in-house, you need a native English speaker who lives in Israel and who lives in the general vicinity of where your offices are, up until COVID, of course. But even now you can see that they're saying, work is from home until whatever, and later it's going to be in Tel Aviv or Ramadan or whatever. And so I've been very involved in the process of finding these people, because usually it's someone without experience. And then my role here has been to figure out, by speaking to people who has the potential to do the best work as a community manager, with the knowledge that I'll be training them. And so I've also been very involved in that process, but kind of at a different angle, because you're talking about much higher level people with experience for the most part and knowing the candidates. And for me, it's pretty much the opposite.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I was just going to add that. So one thing that's interesting about this enablement conversation is you're obviously helping enable the community professional that they hired, but it's also how do you enable everybody else that's going to contribute in the organization, right? So when I do these workshops, whether it's around gamification, promotion, super users, design, whatever the topic of the day is, right, in these workshops, we try to do our best to invite as many people that we think make sense from across the company that are also collaborators and stakeholders. So not only is the community professional, and they may already know all this stuff anyway, right, depending on their level of expertise, and I'm just preaching to the choir there, but it's really valuable, right, to bring in other people and sort of enable them as well. And so that, again, by the time I leave, there should be not one, not two, not five, there should be 10, 12, 15 people in the organization that have at least some level of enablement across some of these vectors, that they know what they're doing and they're operating, right, by the time I depart. And I think that's actually one of the more, ostensibly people hire me for community expertise, but really one of the most valuable things is the enablement that comes out of it, and arming them to be able to go forth, right?
Right. That's one of the biggest reasons, in my opinion, that the community grew exponentially at Payoneer and was so successful and such a huge part of the growth of the company, was because it was very clear from the moment I got there that I'm not just another face on the marketing team. And the founder, it was very important to him specifically that the community be the force that drives. And, he pretty much told everyone that I'm going to get what I need. And it's not that anytime I came with a suggestion from the community that they went and they did it, because they didn't. But first of all, it was being discussed, which is important. And some of them were. And you're right, because you need to have everyone on board. You need sales, you need biz dev, you need R&D, you need like the management R&D to understand why it's important to develop some of the stuff that you need to develop. And it may not necessarily be one of the physical features where you run the community, but it could be something else that would be enabling your community. And the more of the people you have on board with it, the better. Yeah, I agree.
So by the way, how long does usually a process that you guys do take with a client, more or less?
It really depends. I have clients.
So let's take a few. That's why let's do simulations and stuff. I can take, like, I had an amazing client called FitHood, which is now like in the last week, like, Mike, I have to meet with you. We have to sit again. And
it has to be this week.
No, yeah, like this week she's like, we have to have coffee. We need your help. And like we finished by them feeling like, Mike, thanks and bye. Like that's how we finished her. Like it was great. Like we had a contract. We had I'm an accountant, and an accountant that never really practiced. I went straight into KPMG, to the advisory in management consulting, and doing strategic. That's what I did. That's how I grew up. Red Bull and brand managing while I was a student and creating events like a community, and then doing the management consulting there. So I build plans, and I come and I have this methodology that we built, that it's built in 2 layers. The one layer is what we do, which is the community puzzle, which I'm going to give tomorrow a workshop about. And it's the iterations we do that we need to think every time that we go in different stages. And we have 3 stages. The first stage, we say it's called initial analysis. Okay, in the initial analysis, we do what Brian does, and I say there's a price for that, because we need to have everybody on board and all that part. And usually we say it's a sprint, and it should take up to a month. If I work with crazy large nonprofits that also have a lot of money and it's a huge process, and I know that everything with them will take much longer, so it's a 3-month process. But then the second part we call the soft launch. I believe that every community should start with a core member, core team, like strong, really core, and you need to cultivate them. And then we do that process. And then the third part is something that I sometimes put 2 options. I say either I'm going to hire, okay, or train, and that's what happened with FitHood, which is a co-training space that it was more than just initial analysis. We changed their whole business model, which maybe I'll tell in a different time. Really cool. I'll just give you in a nutshell. Every new branch of there is now 40% funded by the community. Imagine you had a business that the community funds it, and then is so, that the famous GIF or picture or slide people usually have with the bacon and the egg. The chicken was committed, and the pork had skin in the game. So that's a different of the kind of commitment that you have with community members when they're a real part of what we did. And then we try to pitch that. But the thing is, what I felt that it sometimes scares some organizations. And also the initial part, that's the hard part to start. Like another client that I got, and they were like, yeah, we're closing tomorrow in January. And it was another nonprofit, but like large with a lot of money. And for 10 months, because the head of innovation wanted us in, the head of communications wanted us in, and the CEO and everybody were like, yeah, okay, but just let's approve here and let's get funds from here. And it took 10 months. It took 10 months for us. And for 10 months, every time, and in the end, I started being very edgy with her. Like, listen, it's not going to work. It's like, oh, no, it's not. Like, she was very defensive. Like, why are you like, it's not my fault. I'm not saying it's your fault, but every time you want me to create a whole new proposal and change and put this section off and because we need to fit this to the budget, and this is now the budget, and that's now the budget, and now we have 5 communities, and tomorrow we need 2, and every time we do that, so where does the buck stop? Where do we say, okay? And that's, I think, the more, because sometimes things like FitHood go well, and we finish. And we had the first location, and we said thank you, and they were really happy, and we trained their community managers in the facilities. And now 10 months later, the biggest compliment: listen, we want to work with you again now. But not all clients are like that. So then, just your take on these kind of issues.
Well, so I think to directly answer your initial question, so I have kind of three specific things that I run into really often. One is people who have no community at all and they need a like full blown thing, and that's usually like a 6-month engagement, right? There's other people that say, well, we're not sure if we want to do this yet, but we want to explore it. And so for me, that means discovery and strategy, and that's usually 2 to 3 months. Depending on the organization, but it's generally like a 2-month type of engagement. And then there's people who have a community, but it needs best practices and they want to kind of like rebuild it, right? That typically I start with, again, like a 2 or a 3-month engagement. And I think, what you're describing, like we've all felt that pain, right? And I think this is going back to like the statement of work and that to set as much as possible, very clear expectations to say, here's how I work. Here's the way that I've seen it work, right? And I'm not just throwing this out there because it like I just decided that. I'm doing it because that's what actually works. And I think along the way, as much as possible, as you get into these conversations where inevitably things will shift and minds are changed and we want to go a different direction, you say, hey, that's fine, but let's look at that in kind of the light of the scope of work we originally agreed on and decide, are we just shifting those hours around? Are we writing up something new as sort of an addendum? And I think just having those really frank conversations along the way to say, here's where we started, here's where we are now. I really want you to be successful, but I'm concerned that we might not get there if we continue, delaying or going down different rabbit holes or different things. And I think that's all part of, just sort of the open communication and sometimes difficult conversations you have to have, but it all needs to be in the spirit at the end of the day is, look, I'm here to make you successful. So I'll do what you want to do. But it needs to be something that in the end is going to make you successful, right? That's the North Star.
I sometimes find myself kind of putting my foot down at some point and saying, listen, stop. We're not making any more changes. We're going to work with what we're just doing. I have a client like that now, actually, who isn't in community management. I'm writing his website and we're almost done. And then yesterday he's like, I saw on one of my competitors' websites, there's this amazing page that they built for all of their projects. And I want to do one of those. And each page of those is going to take like 3 days to build and 2 days to write. And they want 10 of those. And that's like adding another 2 weeks to my work. It's like, look, I don't mind making the money and doing it. But seriously, we've been delaying this website for so long that if you keep changing things and adding things, it's never going to happen. So let's finish what we have, get it up in the air. And then once it's up and you can visually see what's going on, then we can add to it and make changes. And what I do with my proposals is I make them modular. I try to make them as modular as possible. So if I'm
as
doing
modular as possible, that sometimes confuses. The paradox of choice.
Well,
try to be specific. We're trying to. I gave my examples fully, so I would love what's the different models that you give?
So, well, what I do is mine are similar to Brian's, but what I mean by modular is it's not that I break up all the different services. I don't do that because I build my offerings around what it is that their specific needs are. However, if we're talking about like what Brian said before about if they want the one community, the 2 communities, if they want me to do a community and like a Facebook page and then another social page, because often they're not going to have someone else to do it and they kind of lump it all together, then I'll have, part of the work will all be as one thing. All of the advising, all of the training and helping with the employees and blah, blah, blah. That's all going to be the one big thing. And as far as running additional forums or additional outlets, then that I would be pricing not separately, but having like an addition for. And I do this with all the different types of work I do. So if I were giving a quote for social media management, then this is what you want. And if you want another platform, it'll cost X. And I do that also on the community part when I see that there's some indecisiveness.
How do you know before you started working with them what platform will they need? Will it be Lithium? Or will it be, Mobilize or Mighty Networks, or will it be a freemium or WordPress based?
I don't know.
Exactly.
But that's not what I mean. What I mean is that there's, for those of us who work a lot with clients, you can feel
All of us. Yeah.
There's certain ones that are going to be easier to work with than others. And it's not necessarily because they're not good people. It usually comes from confusion and a lack of understanding. And I have an extra tax that I call lack of understanding tax, and I'll tack on kind of an extra fee included because I know that there's going to be extra work here because I'm educating them. I also have super annoying person tax, which I add for projects that I don't really want to take. And like I add a lot of money for those projects. And then when they don't say yes, then I'm okay with it because they're annoying. But when they say yes, and I'm like, for another $500 a month, I'm going to be able to deal with their crap. So
I think that's fair enough. But by the way, I want to get to the point of community outsourcing. So I want to get to the point of community outsourcing because all we were talking until right now was the first stage, which is consulting. Because people are confused and people need community or should have community, and they'll be better off if they have community. By the way, not always, or they would be better off like if we would come, and it happens to me with many clients because my consultant is much more, I'm more of a business strategist because many times I find them how to find resources and what kind of positions to add to the business and marketing and how to brand, because we community people, we have to learn, we have to be multidisciplinary. That's what community does. You have community is first of all building a brand. It's also recruiting people, so it's marketing, and it's also sales because you have to recruit them physically. It's also HR because you have to understand people. I don't know if you know it, but in Israel, there is like this cool abbreviation for a community manager, which is Mankal. It's an abbreviation of community manager. Okay, in letters, but it's the same phonetically as CEO. So it's like a game. You just imagine you had CEO, just instead of E, you had, I don't know, like a double E or a I or something, and CEO. But and when you think about it, in the end, and we're talking in all my sessions about our name, which is the shittiest name and shittiest brand ever, ISCL. Nobody can ever pronounce it or remember it or anything.
Hi, ECStreme Communications. Nice to meet you.
Yeah. I know. How are you supposed
She's going to charge you the tax. You know that, right? She's going to charge you the extra tax to consult with you on your brand.
on the annoying brand abbreviation. Oh, so
we're meant for each other here.
But I want to make a point that the reason I had so much hardships leaving this name because it's something that people don't get, and it's something that it's important for me to get. Startup community leaders. People say, okay, so startup community is only about startup ecosystems. No, startup communities for me is the same. A startup mindset is exactly the mindset that a community leader, that a community entrepreneur is a startup entrepreneur. You have to be techie, you have to be frugal, you have to be resourceful, you have to, think for the long run, you have to have a lot of investments in the beginning to have this, and you're looking for the exponential growth, either in value or in numbers. But it's very similar to the startup mindset. And I think startup leaders and community leaders are people that should work together, and communities help cultivate startups. And startups should cultivate their communities or work with communities or build a community in order to really reinforce their brand, their product, whatever. The space model, most of you, right? The David Spink started that I really love, that you can have a community either for support. You should have a community to cultivate either all around you as a kind of network supporting you or your product, or your different parts. And I want to touch to the point of community outsourcing. So now, we work so hard and we put taxes on clients we don't want. And as Brian said, only like 4 or 5 clients is nice, but still it's a short-term project. There's so many people that we need to go through. How do we continue the phase after we hire people? What about community outsourcing? Is it possible? Is it something that we should do? Can community managers be outsourced? By the way, we saw me and Talia, somebody here in the sessions a few days ago. I think it was Coral from the UK that offered that she has like a service of community outsourcing. And I know Graziti, one of our sponsors, are now starting doing it. And we had an idea, and that's my analysis, that we want to do it together. And that's what I was talking about, community pros. We want to start a group that's all about, like CMX and stuff like that, that talks about community, but the idea is to create some kind of an umbrella that's called community pros, with also not just being a workspace or you know, a treadmill for community professionals to learn and work out in, or, you know, slave in, but a place that we can really facilitate the next generation of community leadership by helping them outsource themselves. Because I think that because it's a job that you put your life and soul in, even though if you outsource, you can't do community without being, you know, committed and passionate about it. And if you do it, it's either you're a really good liar, you have to be a really good way to faking it, and then I think it's hard for the long run, or you really have to be connected, and you have to be also flexible to move with your passion. So we need that kind of space or umbrella, and that's me and Danny and Talia started talking about community pros. So having some kind of business model that's not exactly 100% outsourcing of having employees and selling them, you know, because when you have totally outsourced, you pay as little as you can and sell them for as much as you can. And there's always a conflict. On the other hand, when we do what we do today, which is like, okay, let's help you hire, that's great. And I'm really happy to do that. But by the way, for me, the problem is not about not losing the money. For me, it's the feeling that like the responsibility for the success of what I planned and conceived is on somebody else, and I won't be around to help him, you know. And it's not his fault if it fails, because it was my idea. I came with a plan, and I totally get it. And it happened to me with 2 companies, amazing companies that are really like, I died for them. It was the only company I worked for like a month, with different, you know, every time a presentation and like madman, and, you know, and I knew how it's gonna end. A client that's confused, and what happened after a month said, you know what, we'll decide on hiring and then we'll work with you. And of course they found somebody, which was great, and she's really great. And of course she said, okay, I'll build my own program. And we lost the client. And the question is, can we do this new model? Will we do this new model? What do you think would be the main points on it? Did you ever see it before? Many questions again. Too many questions.
Yeah, well, so, you know, look, I started my career in a similar model, right? I was an outsourced moderator and then an outsourced community manager, and I learned a lot about that. That was years ago, right? And I think the industry's definitely changed a little bit. You know, my general read on this is, you know, can companies successfully outsource moderation? I think so, right? With the right training and sort of enablement. Can they outsource community managers? I think that one depends a little bit more, right? I think it depends on how connected that person is as a contractor to the organization, and like what kind of access they have. Do they feel like they're part of the culture? And ultimately, are they empowered to make the decisions required for success, right? Because I think when you're at an organization, if you're looked at as just like, oh, that's our, you know, that's our contractor over there, that's very different than, hey, they're on our team, right? This is one of our team members, and we treat them as such. So I think that, you know, there's a bunch of questions there. I of course, and it's a little different too, because here I think in the U.S. market, things are a little more mature and companies are a little more willing to hire, you know, full-time roles and things like that. But I generally think that as much integration as possible is always what's needed for success, whether you're a contractor or an employee or whatever it is. Otherwise, you know, I think you find a lot of these disjointed experiences, right? Where you have a community manager, but they're not necessarily speaking on behalf of the company, or maybe they speak out of turn, you know, which causes problems and things like that. So I think, you know, not as a cop-out, but I think it depends is really a strong answer here on what level of commitment does the organization have, and how is that person treated in the scope of their duties and you know, how they're viewed in the organization. I don't know, Talia, what do you think?
You actually said 2 different things, and I agree with both of them. And at the beginning, you said it depends on level of dedication of the community manager to this company. And then at the end of your sentence, you said it depends on the level of involvement of the company. That gives the community manager what they need, which really circles back to what we discussed like half an hour ago about making sure that you get the resources you need. And the truth is that the resources need to be there, whether or not it's someone who's outsourced or not, because the community won't work regardless of if the person is in-house or as a freelancer. I think the real commitment here on the side, the real difficult part is actually on the company and not the community manager, because as a community manager, even if you're working in-house, but especially if you're freelancing, you're not necessarily privy to the roadmap and what plans are going forward. And it's the company's responsibility to make sure that you are updated. This is also true when you're in-house, because often the community department can be overlooked as far as the broader roadmap goes, because they don't necessarily see how we could help 4 months in advance to get things ready for launch of whatever it is that they want to do. And so I feel like the level of commitment on the side of the company needs to be very high. But the biggest challenge is really making sure that they're up to date about what needs to be, what they need to know about the roadmap. And I would also say, depending on the level of involvement of the community manager, also kind of taking the advice of the community manager about what can be done to help. So it's not just the moderation, it's not just the participation, but even, coming back to the company and saying, listen, these are things that the community is saying that would really help them, that would, it can get you to sign more clients because of the problems that they're having. And there's a good chance that other people aren't using your product or your service because you're lacking this particular feature or product or whatever it is, and make sure you're able to pass on that information to the company, which is, again, kind of on the company to make sure that they at least listen to what you have to say and see how that fits into the product roadmap. And of course, even if you're working in-house, still you would be bringing this information and it still may not fit into the product roadmap. You just need to make sure that you're being listened to, that you're able to get what you need from their end to make sure that it can be successful.
Right on. So we have here some stuff in the feed. Cool. So listen, there's a lot of what to do. But tomorrow, Talia and I and Danny are going to publish 2 communities because we can't decide where to start it. We're going to have a community on Facebook and we want to have on LinkedIn. The reason I want to do one on LinkedIn, because the community pros on LinkedIn is going to be professionals on LinkedIn, because I think the future of community management is actually going to be on LinkedIn. LinkedIn isn't right now equipped so much, but I actually I'm part of some communities on LinkedIn that are amazing, which actually helped me answer some of your question, like what's the best platform? And instead, it's not about the platform, even though people say, oh, the platform is not equipped, but it's about what the platform, what's the flavor of the platform. And LinkedIn is a platform, I'm there to get what I need. It's anti-community. In community, you're there to give, to share, and LinkedIn isn't about sharing. It's about finding leads and finding things and having, not being authentic, having a very stuff. So that's why it's not good. But if people noticed the transformation LinkedIn has been going through the last year, it's incredible. And I think LinkedIn are going to the direction of, like, I did a post about it that, like, recently I got like a few connections on LinkedIn, like, yay, how are you doing? Want to connect? Like things you would never imagine a year ago. And, suddenly when you look at the reaction on LinkedIn, you see hearts and you see support and you see, that you see all kinds of different things happening on LinkedIn. Now there's stories on LinkedIn, there's lives on LinkedIn. Things are happening there, and with the professional flavor, but slowly having the more social in the network, and not just being a networking network, but becoming a really social network. So that's one thing we want to cultivate, but also because most of the community managers are on Facebook. Talia, I think we need to do a website or something, but we'll see what we'll do.
I just happen to be married to a programmer who builds websites.
Yeah.
So yeah, Talia, we'll just add that to your scopes, no problem, right?
Of course.
By the way,
by the way, from now on, we put
and she does. She's a Wonder Woman. All of us are, Danny. You're a kick-ass Danny, Wonder Woman, Talia.
I'm
super platform. I don't know, Brian. What's your superpower? I love that question. What's your superpower, Brian?
Well, I mean, usually I go with empathy, right? But I think in the context of this conversation, it's probably just like experience in the trenches for all those years. Seems like seeing it from all the different angles, I think is the most important thing, right? Because I think you tend to get in your own little like silo. If you're on the business side, you're in that silo. If you're on the consultant side, you're in that silo. So I think kind of having the well-rounded view of, hey, here's what actually happens, for all of these different groups of people generally helps me, as Danny says, get shit done. So there you go.
That's after working with Danny for 6 months. He became a branding expert after working with me. So that's it. After branding, I'm Danny. That's it. Like when I said, like, you're kick-ass Danny, 2 weeks later, it's not because of that, of course, but like 2 weeks later after he became kick-ass Danny, like 2 comments were like, Danny, we want to pay you more. No, we want to pay you more. We want to pay you, Danny. No. And suddenly, and so that's the difference, people, and that's, Amir Shvat. We talked about Amir Shvat. When he like did a session with me almost 6 months ago, and he was talking to me about my challenges, that I'm well off, and I have like 7 teammates already working with me. So it means, I'm building something that's probably good enough if I can support all of us. But But as Amir said, companies don't care about building community. They care about the output to community. And we need to understand. So saying I have empathy doesn't, okay, that's great. Why does it help me as a company? Oh, I was in the trenches. What does it help me? And that's, I think, what we should have in our superpowers as community. We should explain the end point. We give you less for more. We're Wonder Woman because we're able to do programming and content and facilitation and events. And when I was hired for WeWork, even though WeWork isn't real community, it's in a sense very much community because the mindset was like a community manager. You get the building, you get the space, and we have to do everything from fixing the locks to technical stuff, to marketing the space, to doing sale tours, and also, doing member touch and support and facilitation for free events and organizing events. So I think that's the main thing about building a community. You have to think of all the aspects of a community. In many ways, a community is building a micro-organization within an organization in many ways. Isn't that correct?
Yeah.
So that's that. I feel like I already lost everyone. So
we're listening.
So sorry.
Well, Mike, you're making the point that I often make, which is at the end of the day, like business value is the thing people care about, right?
Exactly.
And so I can tell in a lot of cases when I show up places and they say, what makes you different than other consultants or whatever, and I say, well, I don't know, but the one thing I can tell you is that like we're going to get to the business value part of this, right? We're actually going to figure out, is it saving costs? Is it generating revenue? Is it top line, bottom line? What are those high level business goals, right? And at the end of the day, like that's what really matters to companies. And we can talk about how we get there, right? With community and all of the things that brings with it. But the dollars are it's kind of the thing that people really care about at the end of the day. So.
Which is a whole different subject of KPIs and how you prove some of the work, because a lot of it can be difficult to show as far as value goes and bottom dollar and all. But that's a whole different panel.
Yeah.
Tune in next year.
It's actually not a whole different, it's not that next year. It's going to be tomorrow. Tomorrow we have a masterclass with Brian. It's going to talk especially about KPIs. By the way, you have a masterclass too, Talia, tomorrow, right?
I just led into that and I didn't even remember you were doing that. Look at that.
Yeah. So
yes, I also have a masterclass tomorrow about how to use content to grow your community and grow your community through content and use your community to generate the right content for them.
So that's going to be super interesting, and I'm going to enjoy all your sessions. And we hope you have enough people, and if not, we'll just have drills. An hour and a half for me is not a lot of time, I think. I'm going to do what I do in 8 hours in an hour and a half, just touching, because we're just going to touch the points of the community puzzle and talking about what I talked today, and just in a more workshopy, masterclassy way, and embedding our insights from our experience and different communities we try to build, and that's it. So Talia, tomorrow when are you tomorrow? And to see in the schedule,
6:30 Israel time, PM.
6:30 Israel time. Brian, you can be awake for that. And yeah, Brian, as you said, let's see, day 3, you're on track.
9:30 Israel time.
Yeah, 9:30 Israel time, which is half an hour early. And you're competing with John. You know John Summers, of course, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Great. So only the best of the best for our summit. May the best community pro win. And what, by the way, I think we should do, Talia, and I had it in my head in the beginning of the session, we're just going to open probably like a registration thing and start adding people that would like to join the community and have like an info about our dream, and just we'll start adding people who would like to join and why they would like to join, and then we'll just onboard them later on. And Aviva Barak, Dana, guess Sababa. Danny, why did you write Sababa? Was it like insulting when I said that we helped you with a kick-ass Danny? No, I'm joking. Anyway, we love you all, guys, and we have such an amazing people here. And I'm 13 plus hours and I'm full of energy. It's only because of you guys, and it's so much fun to speak to you. And I'm going to end the session so you can go back to work, Brian, and Talia can go to sleep. And
I work too, actually.
Yeah, I work too, by the way. Bye.
Bye.